it is a really big call, to step into oneself that way. And what was interesting as well when we had the opening circle is that a lot of people said, I really struggle with the word beautiful and I really struggle with the word leadership. And so actually that redefining of what it is to be a leader, which to me is to be a human at this time on Spaceship Earth, right? Like we all need to be activated in our worth and in our vision, and to understand our traumas, and to be courageous.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess.
Hello, welcome to the show. This is Dan. Thanks for tuning in. It means a lot with all the offerings on the interweb that it's fantastically. I'm grateful that you've tuned into the Spaceship Earth podcast. So this is episode 41, and in this episode I'm in conversation with Amisha Ghadiali. Now this took place last October, and Amisha, if you don't know her, is host of one of my favourite podcasts, The Future is Beautiful, which to me is an exceptional podcast. It's a podcast that I go to all the time, and it's an offering where I always find like the most beautiful humans having really radically honest, interesting, meaningful explorations, challenging as well. But I personally think often having some of the most important conversations of our time, the type of conversations that I just wish were happening far more widely in far more places. I think the potential in these spaces and these conversations is enormous. So I can't recommend Amisha's podcast more highly. It's had continues to have a huge impact on me, the way I look at the world, the way I think about the world, the guests that she brings in and the spaces she creates. Now, Amisha is also a healer. She's a yoga teacher. She is a leadership coach. She brings together and guides groups exploring new dimensions of what it means to lead in these times, and different ways of knowing and seeing the world. She has just authored as well an amazing new book about intuition. It's called Intuition: Access Your Inner Wisdom, Trust Your Instincts, Find Your Path. Has just come out. So yeah, I really wholeheartedly recommend checking out Amisha's work. It's there is so much depth around what she's doing, but yeah, well worth checking in on. So I'm going to cut straight to it. This is episode 41 of the Spaceship Earth podcast with Amisha Ghadiali. Enjoy.
Amisha, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be aboard.
Yeah, exactly. Right, off we sail or fly or whatever we're going to do for the next 60, 70 minutes. Where are you, by the way? Because I was always keen to sort of find out where we are these days in this.
I'm in the northeast of the UK, in a town called Grimsby. And I'm here because my father died a few months ago, and I'm staying with my mum through this transition period.
I've got you. Yeah, I remember you sharing some of that in some of your podcasts over the summer months. And I guess that's for me, where, I've, sort of, I'd say I'm a huge fan of The Future is Beautiful. It's probably my sort of go-to most listened to podcast. You got podcasts, I don't know how you do this, but I've got, quite a lot of podcasts I subscribe to. And, you sort of tune in and out of different episodes, but I think The Future is Beautiful is a podcast where I think not every episode, but pretty much most of them I think I've listened to. And I think, so you are, you're a bit of an inspiration for my podcast, to be fair, but I guess your podcasts, and I think hopefully some of my listeners I know will know your work, but there's so much sort of what I would call wisdom and depth and radical honesty, I like to say, in your podcast. And I think it's just personally, is just so much need for the sort of spaces that you're creating. So I'm really excited to have you here on the Spaceship Earth, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really strange and wonderful to hear that. I still can't quite get my head around, like, after 4 years, like how many hours that is that I've spent with different people around the world that I don't know.
Yeah.
Because a podcast is so intimate in that way when we listen to them. But it's been a real beautiful journey to have those conversations. And yeah, I think the honesty part is so needed if we're gonna find a different way of relating and being on this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as I say, there's so much in, the guests that you bring together, and I think that, because, and you sometimes, you have obviously the one-to-one conversations, but over the summer, at least, I was checking to some of these gatherings that you were creating as well with multiple guests, and I think like it's such an art to do what you do, to create a space for some really, and the conditions, I think, for really, just really interesting things to surface, and conversations maybe that, at least for me, I think I've said this to you before, like in a mail at one point, someone's like, I run quite a bit with on trail runs and quite long runs, and I'll often listen to your podcast on those runs, because they sort of get me out into nature, and I get a long time to actually just, really get into a deep conversation. But there's often times where I've been stopped in my tracks listening to you and your guests, because just some of the things that come up are like, whoa, I just need to listen to that, or it's, literally has stopped me. And I just think, it's, I don't know what it is. I find it quite hard to find these conversations, these kinds of spaces where I guess that kind of depth is coming up. They're sort of non-judgmental, but also, really, really honest. And maybe that's what it is. It's this honesty thing. But tell me, the future is beautiful, right? I guess even what that means right now for you, as we're in this kind of, it'd be interesting to just sort of, get a sense of that.
What does it mean to me, the future is beautiful?
Yeah. Right now, I guess, like, where we're sort of, I tell you why, because I was chatting to my youngest daughter at breakfast this morning, and I was talking about your podcast, and I said, what does the future, if the future was beautiful, what would it be like? And she said to me, well, the best thing she said was, I'd go to school and I'd be able to learn about whatever I wanted to learn about, which I thought was quite kind of interesting and brilliant. But I guess, it's in these times, because so much is unraveling, and to hold on to to have a kind of, I guess, a sort of a space for beauty, or a vision, or an intention of beauty in front of us is, again, there's a lot in that, isn't there, to sort of hold that in these times? Yeah,
for sure. It's something I have quite an interesting relationship with, because I started this project 10 years ago, and it was called Think, Act, Vote at the time. I think the time that you and I very first met was when I came to talk to the Good for Nothing team at lunchtime once to,
That's
get
right.
some like, some
input
and ideas of like how to move this thing forward. And when I decided, I think in 2016, that I wanted to relaunch the book, partly because we'd made this beautiful book called The Future We Choose. And I had made a few like concessions, just because I was working very collaboratively at the time, and we decided to make the cover quite plain, I think, because we didn't want to not be taken seriously. And I think, especially like as a woman, and because I used to also work in sustainable fashion, I kind of felt sometimes, I have to make this thing seem more serious, like, so that it's not dismissed. And so I made this book, and it was called The Future We Choose, when I think I wanted to call it Creating the Future. And it got to this this time of 2016, and I thought actually I'd had some funny experiences with the book. Like I actually remember giving a copy to Gordon and Sarah Brown, as a like, this is a political manifesto, and her response was, well, it's really rather heavy, isn't it? And, didn't seem very impressed that she then had to take home such a heavy book.
It's too much weight in this manifesto.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I thought, actually, I don't know why I did that. The cover isn't the same as what's inside the book, and I actually hadn't managed to get like the print on demand sales working properly, and so I was renaming it, and I was going to go with creating the future, really as that call and that invitation and that acknowledgement that that's what we're all doing, which is essentially what this project is about, that how we spend our time, our energy and our money is creating the future, and we can choose where that goes to a certain extent, and we can have a vision that guides the way in which we live, and the way in which we connect. And then what was interesting was that my friend Andy Gibson, the founder of Mind Apples,
I remember,
who is, I think at one point his Twitter profile said something like grumpy optimist. And he said, why don't you name it what you want to name it? And I was like, well, what is that? And he said, the future is beautiful. And I was like, can I? And in a way that question was like, if I call it the future is beautiful, is it just going to be dismissed as something silly? And to be fair, I think I've made my life a lot harder by calling it the future is beautiful. I think had I called it creating the future, and like when I started the podcast, if I'd called it something like that, a little bit more generic, it might have been a bit easier, and it wouldn't have got so much judgment and like this sort of looking down upon, or like cynicism that Brits especially are so good at.
Yeah, really good.
And I, I've had it before where I've been in. I was at an event. Events. Do you remember those?
That's mad, isn't it? In how in such a few months it seems such a weird concept.
Yeah. So in December, I was at an event and I was talking to someone, and we were talking about the podcast, and then somebody else came over, a man that like runs a kind of think tank type thing that, I've met a good few times, and he heard us talking about the podcast, and he was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, we're talking about the future is beautiful. And the other gentleman that I was with was like, oh, have you listened to Amisha's podcast? It's this and it's that and whatever he was saying about it. And this man said to me, oh, I'd never listened to your podcast because I just always assumed like it wasn't for me, or, like it wasn't, because it's
because of the word beautiful.
Because of the word beautiful. Mm. And so that's been really interesting to realize that I've been having to deal with a lot of that kind of conditioning from the outside. Mm. And I was talking actually to Jem Bendel about the name, and he said, because when you started this, you didn't know what was coming exactly. And so how does it feel now? And I was like, well, I was never going to call it the future is doomed, like what's the point? That's not what it's about.
We've got enough of that around anyway.
Yeah. And it's also not true. It's like what we're talking about is a lot of change and, a need for adaptation and different ways of doing things. But if we can't be connected to beauty through all of that, then like who even wants to be alive? And I say that kind of casually, but we are living at a time where there is a huge epidemic of mental illness and suicide, and there's a lot of doom and gloom about what's happening. And for me, it's like, if I'm alive, if I'm breathing, then there's beauty, and I want to be able to taste and acknowledge that beauty. And for me, the beauty isn't just in like the happy, it's in all of the moments of life. Like my dad's death was beautiful, and it was many other things as well. But there is always beauty to be found, and the future is beautiful. Like, it will be, it just is. And as now is, even if it's challenging, but we can't say that life ever wasn't challenging. Maybe it wasn't challenging for you or for I, or it didn't feel like where things were difficult were touching our communities. But there are communities all over the world that have always been facing some of the issues that we're talking about in what's being brought to the surface now. And so I don't feel like, actually, when I really think about it today, or when I sit with this title today, I feel like it's not even that bold a statement. It's just a reclamation of why we're here.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I was just curious, as in, because I know that's, you know, as again, it's, and I think more so about, also with, I'm very curious at the moment about words, and, you know, how we use words, and often, you know, what we, you know, the meaning that we believe to be in a certain word or a certain story, and actually what sits underneath all of that, you know. And I think, I mean, something you've said, I think, in the in the past about, I mean, you've talked a lot about, you know, you do, and I guess that's the thing, you're in your podcast with your guest, the beauty is not in the, you know, what we see to be obvious, the obvious beauty of how something looks or feels, but it's actually just in the expression and the behavior and the kind of intention. And, you know, it's about sort of caring and being compassionate and being open to different perspectives. There's the beauty in that, you know, all these things that sort of don't currently exist in a sort of quite divisive sort of time that we're in. So there's something about that for me, and I think you're absolutely right. This whole, you know, there has to be light that we're also working with and moving towards, as well as the darkness that is inevitably part of that as well, I guess. So yeah, no, it's interesting. But as I say, I just even just, you know, I was talking about with, I say, my daughters this morning, just about what does that mean to them. You know, it's just, again, really interesting for me how quickly even young kids can, you know, their sort of sense of a word can be shifted through what they're experiencing at the moment in the culture. Mm-hmm. But you came to the podcast, you know, so that's, you know, you've journeyed in many forms, right? I mean, you've come through fashion and politics, and I mean, I've actually, I think the last time I saw you was was a yoga class that you offered out at
was that at Alter Ego?
What was it? Alter Ego, right, exactly. And so you're a yoga teacher, healer, you're a leadership coach. Tell me a little bit about, I guess this, for me, look, what comes through a lot is this there's a lot of care in your work, but tell me a bit about that journey.
Well, thank you first, Dan, for letting me kind of therapize a little bit about being the carrier of the title, The Future is Beautiful, because clearly I needed to get that off my chest.
I actually really like it.
Yeah, and now I think at this point I'm just like, I'm fully committed and I'm with it.
Yeah.
But that's in itself been a journey. So yeah, this journey of like, who am I? I guess for me, I guess there's two things have happened. Like, one is that I've just sort of found myself interested in different things, and then I've also not always found a space for myself within those things.
Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, I suppose there's a lot of projects that I like worked on a lot and gave a lot of time to, and then, you know, they never kind of tipped into like a sort of full-time financed position and things like that. Yeah. And so there's a lot of things that I did, or, you know, the budget's only allowed for 2 days a week or something like that. And so in a way, because of the things that I was interested in, and because some of them weren't, well, I think kind of all of them were things that hadn't really been done before, it meant that I wasn't quite ever jumping into like, oh, here's a role and here's a salary and here's like, here's a job, you know. It was more like, okay, yeah, like we could yeah, you could do this part-time, and then I'd, be working on my own projects part-time. And so in a way, part of it has been like just a little bit of a scramble of,
yeah. But that's often, I mean, I guess some of that is because of the nature of, you're often, well, it seems like you're often on the edges of what's unfolding.
Yeah, it does seem that way. So I've again realized like, oh, okay, that's sort of what's happened. I've ended up putting in a lot of work into something, like before it's really understood and seen. And so, say for example, with sustainable fashion, I did so much work on that for about 5-6 years, but we're talking before the Rana Plaza building collapse and before things became more mainstream. And so I guess by the time it was like, oh, you can now set up a label and the supply chain works and you can set up a profitable business selling clothes, I'd already moved on to something else that I was interested in. So that's kind of happened a lot along the way. And then what I'm really interested in right now is this idea of the things that you do are more like tools rather than like who you are, and that actually this kind of sense of like, I am a this, so I could say, I am a yoga teacher, I am an intuitive therapist, I am a podcast host, I am a facilitator, I am a social entrepreneur. I can just, I am, or I could say, these are some of my tools. And
I like that.
And that for me works better because I think as humans we're so multifaceted, and as a dad, that you have to do all kinds of things that you wouldn't necessarily say like, oh, I am this, but you have to figure it out, right? And then you find that tool and then you're like, oh yeah, I can do this. And so that's what we're like as humans. We have all these different tools, and if we're interested in things, then we can learn about different things and we can practice different things. And then for me, what became really interesting was how these different threads weave together. And so for me, I feel like the work that I'm doing now, it very much brings everything I've done together. And maybe everyone's work does as well. But I guess just because it's in fields that weren't so culturally, created before and established, and because it's been a lot of like working for myself and creating projects and then trying different things as well, that it's come that way.
It's really interesting. I've been quite a few, this sort of, these kind of conversations around the threads that people are involved in, and I think again, I think in at least the idea of specialization, which has been, maybe still is in some ways, but at least when I was on the sort of growing up and educating, and then come back, what are you going to be? It's the I am, and it's sort of, but actually again, when we sort of look at this kind of some of the many issues we're kind of struggling with right now, and how useful is over specialization, and actually how dangerous maybe some of it is as well, or the ability to sort of, I mean, some people like Ella so much called, I think it's pluralism, we'll call it, having all these sort of multiple, you just said tools, but I think there's something really interesting, and I can relate as you're talking in my own journeying, sort of feeling quite unsure about, for many years, not really being able to say what I am or what I do, but actually now in these times, actually again, sort of feeling that you can see what connects your different, the different ways you show up and the different offerings that you can give to the world. And there is something that connects them all, but they can feel quite different. But maybe there's something in that in these times as well, of having a more sort of diversity to our, what I mean, to our sort of being in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend and collaborator, who is actually now on the team of the podcast, Anna Greta Folderbach, she talks about being a cultural futurist, and that therefore the skills, they are tools that are about the vision, and I would like to step into using that title. I'm not really there yet with being able to say it, but
use it. You can use it now. Use it
somewhere.
now.
But when she was talking about it, it really resonated for me, because that's what a lot of the work that I've been doing has been about. It's been about shaping the culture of the future in a way that is more regenerative and more embodied and connected to the heart, and embraces into being and is empowering.
Yeah, I love that. What was for you then? I guess this sense of I'm going to call it caring, right? But caring for something bigger, or can you remember as you were growing up, having an experience of sort of wanting or sort of connecting with a sense that there's something bigger out there for you to kind of engage with, or I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, it's hard to know exactly the moments, but I think coming from like an immigrant family and growing up with different cultures was something that showed me a lot about the world at an early age. And I remember my parents would take me everywhere, and we would go to India, and I would experience very much like the kids at the door of the car, that need money everywhere. And I don't think I even really understood that, at that age, like the difference of, if I lived in India, I probably wouldn't have been one of those kids, but it felt to me very much like, oh, like how come I have all this and they don't have anything? And so I think that was a thing that I was always really aware of, that not only was I different from everyone around me in the town in which I lived, where we were the only non-white family. And so I was the only one that had my grandmothers and everyone didn't live in the same area and all of that. But also was, aware that there were these different possibilities of life and that people had access to different things. And I guess I always felt like I had access to quite a lot and was interested in what I could do with that. And it wasn't always, I think I definitely had my teen years. I got a bit wrapped up in some other things that were less altruistic. And, but then saying that, I don't know, I did volunteer like with play schemes, working with like, kids with special needs and stuff when I was a teenager as well. And my parents were both psychiatrists, and my dad was a Jungian analyst. So I was also very aware of the complexity of humans and the struggle, I guess, of being a human. Because my dad's practice was at our house and evenings and weekends. And, I would be actually making tea for his patients, and I really loved doing that. It was my favorite job. I preferred it much more than school. It was like, and sometimes, he would be overrunning. So I would be like taking them to like the waiting room and making them tea and then often sharing a song or passing the tissues or whatever it was that, was required in that space. And so I kind of had a sense of these really normal looking people had something that they were suffering with. And so that's definitely an aspect of it. And then when I was, I don't know, I guess maybe 18, and at that time living in Derby, and being quite into like high heels and handbags, there was a moment where like maybe I could have gone and been like a management consultant or something. And then I went traveling, and I had a near-death experience, which ended up being the first of 3 that happened between the ages of 19 and 24. And we went 50 meters down the side of a mountain in a bus, and it's kind of a miracle that we didn't know, actually nobody died on our bus, and it smashed into a tree stump where there was like a really steep drop just behind, like beyond where we'd stopped, and we all kind of managed to climb out. And the doctor said it was a complete miracle that we'd all survived, and that he'd known of so many accidents on that road, and in 10 years we were the second accident where everyone had survived. And so I had a moment with that of feeling like, okay, like what are you going to do with your life, and what's the contribution that you're going to make? And so then, as I was about to go and study politics, it really, I was then volunteering a lot and interning a lot, and doing lots of different kind of aspects of trying to understand how the world worked, and trying to understand how I could be part of changing that story. And so, I guess that was quite a powerful experience, like as a really young adult, to have.
It's interesting that you're talking about your dad's practice and sort of getting a sense of the sort of struggles that people have, which is kind of interesting, because I guess, again, like I know, a lot of your, many of your guests, and I guess just the space that you create allows a lot of stuff to come out. People are being, as I sort of talk about this idea of this, radical honesty, and it's okay to have that sort of, and actually, when we're able to share more of who we really are, I guess, what comes from that, and it feels to me that, where we are today and what's going on, I've felt for a long time, and had my own personal struggles, as we all do, but just the spaces for the reveal, where we actually, we get to reveal more about who we actually really are just so hard to find in our modern culture. And how much of that is actually, perpetuating this, I guess this, sense of maybe, this separation, I guess, that we see around us a lot. But this, and speaking a little bit to those instances you just spoke of, do we need, is it trauma and tragedy that sort of wakes us up more to this? I don't know, but it's something I'm constantly wrestling with. It's just like, what, how will we get to a stage where it is accepted and normal to get into a circle at the start of a day and reveal what's really going on for us? And I know it's happening in places, but what's your sense, I guess, because you've been working with a lot of this, a lot of these practices and work for a long time, but do you get a sense that we're going to see some breakthroughs in terms of, opening up more, in terms of, to be able to reveal more about who we really are?
I hope so. I don't know this year if I have a sense of what's happening in the world, because I feel like I've been, I'm in my own space, and the two worlds that I have access to are the TV, which my mum watches, and I haven't had a TV for about 10 years. Not that I've never watched TV, but I would watch like a series of something. I've not had a TV that's just on. And
how's that been?
And so it's been amazing. I've loved it. But being here, it's like there's a TV and it's on, and so then I'm like stumbling into like mainstream culture, like, when I just go and say hi or whatever, or bring some food or whatever. And so, and then I'm sort of then catching more of the news, and so I'm sort of seeing that, like what's happening on like the one show and like, on the TV, and that's kind of quite interesting for me, because I haven't known for years.
Yes.
And then I would say that the Zoom world that I'm in is also very particular. And so what's happening on a bigger scale, I couldn't really tell you, but I think for me, because I had already been a facilitator of spiritual retreats actually before I started the podcast, and I had been taking people on yoga retreats and pilgrimages, and and creating space for connection, that meant that level of openness then kind of spilled into the podcast. And for me, it's been so incredible on both a personal level and also like on its contribution to the community that's been created around it. Because when I started the podcast, I thought maybe it had to be more like of what I'd heard before. And I sort of tried to, but I couldn't quite pull it off. Like it had its own aliveness and depth that was just natural. And it would have felt like selling everything short if I didn't allow for that. And I did used to think, oh gosh, was that an overshare? Or then someone in my family and be like, I can't believe you shared that on the podcast. And then I'd be like, oh God, like, was that the wrong thing to do? And, you know, not that I was particularly employable before, but am I really like not employable now?
Totally gone
and
now.
So, you know, there was a lot of that fear. And actually where I've got to it now is that I don't think there's anything in my life that I feel shame about anymore. And, you know, I think probably by 2 years ago, anything that brought up some shame, I'd just be like, oh, I better out that on the podcast. And then, and then like let it, you know, then be liberated from it. And also doing that partly to liberate myself, but mostly because I know for me that there was a lot that I experienced or struggled with that I felt was not normal, or I felt like no one else was experiencing that because of the way in which the dominant culture works and the way in which the dominant culture teaches us how to wear masks, not the masks that we're wearing at the moment, but the masks we already had on, right? And so then I didn't always know how I could really relate to people. And what's been amazing is that with the podcast and just really going in with that intention of just being very like real and of that moment, and then also really just then letting it go. So I'm sure if I listened back to some other episodes, I'd be like, oh my God, I don't think that anymore. Or like, oh, I can't believe I said that or whatever. But it's like, I don't care. It was a bit of, it had its moment. And then actually by sharing those things, those struggles, those questions, what it has done is, what I've realized is that there's a lot of people that have similar questions or inner struggles, or have been in similar situations and felt disconnected in the ways that I felt disconnected. And so what it's brought to me is a lot of connection, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, and you've some of the stuff I think you've heard you talking about, but you there's some of your work which is trying to explore the self as well. This idea of, like, I think you've said, like, looking for the answers in ourselves rather than seeking from others, and how I think there's another thing, the phrase about cultivating stronger relationships in yourself is world changing. I think I heard you say that once on something, and I thought it was just super fascinating about why there's so much in that. But why? Yeah, what is it in our kind of modern culture which has sort of, you know what I mean, finds that ability, restricts our ability to go in on ourselves and really explore?
Well, I think we're told that there's only certain parts of ourselves that are palatable, and that there's only certain parts of ourselves that are appropriate for certain situations, and that we're not given a framework, of how to really understand our emotions and how to understand the complexity that it is to be a human. And with all of that stifled, it really, it blocks us, it blocks who we are. And then that gets inverted and it comes out in addictions and mental illnesses and needing to get power over and all these other distortions. Whereas when we're actually allowed to be who we are, then we don't have that same that same feeling of being kind of trapped in ourselves, or needing to kind of wrestle for worth and validation, because we just feel it within ourselves. And it, in a way, it's similar to what we're talking about with beauty, of how, like, when we just know that it's okay to believe that the world can be better than it is right now, and to work on that, and that's our birthright. And it's such a strange thing to even say, with like a slight bit of apprehension. And the slight bit of apprehension, it's not mine. Like, I know that. I've known that since I was a baby, you know? But I have been in a world that can be so cynical about this stuff, and so like dismissive of it, that I've spent half of my life questioning, like, am I mad for caring about this? Yeah. And the answer is no, not that. I might be mad for other reasons, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. I think that our souls are wild, and that's something important as well. But yeah, I can't believe how much time I've wasted questioning actually what's very like innately human. Because if we didn't come here wanting to make this world better, like what did we come here for, you know? Because I don't think we came here thinking, oh yeah, I really want to do like a mediocre job and contribute to GDP. And contribute to GDP and climate breakdown, and feel mostly unsatisfied. Like, I don't think that that's anyone's like goal or intention or desire even. And yet somehow we live in a system that makes that seem normal and makes anything else seem weird. And how messed up is that?
It's massive. It's massive. It's a massive mess. I mean, so the thing is, because so this is the challenge of our time, isn't it? How do you break out of this? And there's obviously lots going on in all of this, and I'm sort of interested. I've been more getting curious over the years around the sort of obedience in our culture. You know, how we sort of in many ways become quite obedient, and maybe that's through fear and probably all sorts of other things. Some of the things we're talking about, you know, not feeling you can express how you truly feel, but also like almost not wanting to step out of line or to question too much. Do you know what I mean? I'm sort of curious again where that, because that again, that curiosity to sort of to explore and to express, and you see it in children, and then this kind of sort of obedience that seems to start sort of being a dad. I've sort of noticed it. I've noticed it a bit as my kids have got older, you know, as they go through the sort of school system.
Yeah.
There's a sort of an obedience thing that starts to come in, particularly in sort of secondary school, with sort of head down, almost not wanting to be seen. Do you know what I mean? Or not wanting to stand out or to express yourself. And I sort of worry about all of that in these times more, because it sort of feels like, we're being called to, you know, not necessarily to be, well, we're definitely, I mean, disobedience, mischievous, whatever you want to call it, but we're being called to act on our deeper intuition, right? So yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just it's something which really is it's sort of really on my mind a lot of, and I see it not just in children, but I see it in my peers. I see it in, you know, it seems to be, you know, we can get, you know, look at the last few months, it seems to be becoming more and more obvious that everything is unraveling. And yet it also feels like there's a tendency still to try and maybe not quite accept it, or just, you know, ignore it, or just get on with things. You know what I mean? I don't know.
I totally know what you mean. And for me, what you're expressing, Dan, is exactly why inner transformation and systemic change are completely linked, because we have to break through, like, with ourselves, that desire to conform to something that is even the thing that we don't even actually really want to be conforming to. And it's really normal why we do that. We are like picking up all our subconscious information from the third trimester that we're in the womb until the age of 7. And then at the age of 7, the ego kicks in and we start to kind of control our reactions more. But we understand from a really young age, so before that time that we're 7, we do understand like how human dynamics work, and so what we have to do to fit in. And it's hardwired in us to fit in with a tribe and to conform. And and that's because in tribes, of yonder, there was, if you were like not in the tribe, then that meant that you were going to die. Like you wouldn't have food and you wouldn't have fire and you wouldn't have what you needed. And so that step to break away from the tribe is really difficult. And it also, what this means is that as adults, if we haven't looked at our subconscious material, we're basically like 7-year-olds in adult bodies. And that's really obvious when you look at certain politicians. But actually, when you even just look around your friends, you can kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, I can see what you were like as a kid. And it's really fascinating. It's something like 95% of our thoughts that come from our subconscious, and most of them are actually the same thoughts that we had the day before. And if we haven't really done the work of clearing our subconscious patterning, 75% of these will often be like limiting, self-sabotaging beliefs. And we feel safer kind of in the tribe, and which in this case is dominant culture. Like that's the culture that means that you get the job, you get the mortgage, things go smoothly for you.
Yeah.
And so that's why I really feel like, the work that you and I are doing, like having conversations, and therefore, for me with The Future is Beautiful, there's a big emphasis on community. Yeah. Because we need to know that there are other people out there that are also saying, hang on a minute, no, like, I'm not doing that anymore.
I'm not feeling
this. So because we have to know that we're safe if we step out. And so, I think that's really, I understand it from all the angles of why it happens. And now we just need more courage. We need more people to be more aware and to make living from the heart and an embodied sense of who we are and a reciprocity with the earth just normal, because they were normal things for humans at one stage, and they are.
Yeah. You just talked about the having community around this this journeying that more folks, I guess, are starting to make, or putting themselves on the edges of stepping into a space of unknowing, and the need for community around them. And now you've built up the Presence Collective, right, around the podcast. Can you talk a bit about that, and also just how that's been this year particularly? I'm really curious about, obviously, this year's felt like about 3 decades in 5 months or whatever. But I mean, how's that been for you, building this community around? Because you do a lot of work with your community, don't you, around the podcast?
Yeah, well, so we have like there's patrons of the podcast, and we have calls with them, and then there's this thing, Presence Collective, which I wanted to create something where we would go deeper into exploring the themes, so that rather than just you hear this podcast and it's like all this information and it's you take a little bit away from it, that we could look at different themes that come up in the show, like over and over again, and then I do that more in like a workshop style, where there's it's much more like, this is the theme, and we have contemplation questions over that month on that theme, and we have calls for the community, and it's really beautiful for an online space. It's very supportive and exploratory and nourishing for the soul, and it's been really lovely during this time. And I'm finding myself this year really stripped away from physical community. I haven't really got like a home right now, and like a sense of like, this is where I am in the world. Like I spent 11 weeks of this year on my own in a treehouse writing a book, and
that's in West Lexham. I've slept in that treehouse.
It's an excellent place, that treehouse.
It's an excellent treehouse.
Yeah. And then I've just been here in Grimsby for 4 months, where we're very much shielding still. And so,
and because you used to travel a lot, didn't you? I mean, because a lot of most of your podcast conversations were always in situ with, in face to face with your guests, weren't they?
Yeah, they were, because I really wanted it to be a space of depth and slowness, and not a space of like ego. And so then it also meant that it had to bring in like the synchronicity of like being in the same place as someone at the same time, and like a bit of the spontaneity of it, rather than like just like, who do I want to be on the show? And like, so that was a really nice exercise. And I really loved doing that all face to face. But then I have to say, I am so grateful for Zoom during these months. And actually I felt like we have the same depth during the podcasts that we've had, over these months, and that they've really been really nourishing for me and really restorative for my soul and my vision and that sense of community. I'm in a place which I think I'm not the only person that's grappling with this, of like not quite knowing where to be physically, and balancing a kind of mixture of community needs and being around people with similar visions, and then also with like what financial resources are around and land resources. And I think there's so many people that want to live in a different way that is more like co-living,
more intentional.
And it's not that easy to do at the moment, because we don't have the it's just we don't have the infrastructure for that yet. And so I think like quite a lot of others, questioning like kind of where to go next.
And it's sort of excuse me, the whole it's curious, isn't it? Because I can remember just how this is, this sort of continues to, I guess this is the thing. It's like, this kind of, things have been uncertain for a long time, but I guess this sort of now it feels like, because it's weird, because it's almost like now, because of coronavirus, it's like, the uncertainty is sort of consensus uncertainty. Do you know what I mean? Whereas it used to be sort of like only if you kind of felt it deeply in your intuition that you knew things were pretty not right. But now it's sort of clear, and we, because the virus continues to sort of, where are we now? It's like it's the middle of October, I guess, and it looks, I don't know, but it looks like if you look on the sort of media, it's all going off again, and so this sort of space continues to sort of unravel. The uncertainty continues to sort of, do you know what I mean? It's simmering, or it's turning up again. It's sort of not. And I wonder, so part of me sort of thinks like, what is, when I look for sort of maybe something, some other meaning behind what's going on, but you kind of think, what is this? What are we learning from all of this? And because it's like you say, it's, there's a lot of restriction. And then there's things that have been sort of revealed and learned through that, but then there's also, like you say, like how to I guess it's like there is sort of no, it's almost impossible to have any form of certainty beyond maybe what we see. For me, it's like, I live near the woods, that's my certainty. I go out into the woods, and that's where it feels like I feel I kind of know what's going on there. But everything else is just, it is so sort of, it's constantly shifting. And I wonder, again, I don't have an answer. I'm sure we don't. I guess it's just, I'm curious as to where, what happens next? Like, as I say, looking for some form of, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's just, I guess it just keeps coming, right? And so is this now, will it just keep unraveling? How will we,
how will we sort of know when to step into something slightly different? It's just, it's baffling, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I think some of the uncertainty was always there. I mean, I think even when we live a lifestyle that feels very certain, it's not like, it just feels that way because it feels protected through like the lens of the dominant kind of culture. But I feel grateful in myself that like the practices that I have and the ways of being that I have been exploring has meant that I feel okay in the uncertainty. The one bit that I find more challenging with not knowing how long all this is going to go on for is the biological clock part of being a woman. But apart from that, I'm like, okay, like it, and we just continue, and we keep renewing our spirits and just making steps towards our vision. And I found that, I haven't had like the most sort of blissful version of it. My father died, so it's been quite an interesting and challenging year. But I've also feel like I've received quite a lot of clarity, and the slowness has really nurtured a part of my body and soul, and that feeling of connection and togetherness, like beyond the physical, has felt very strong. And I guess also I got the really beautiful task of writing a book on intuition this year. So that was a really nice focus for the year, to be in this scenario of so much uncertainty and uncovering and conflicting narratives and not knowing what's true and who's right, to be really deeply exploring the importance of intuition and what intuition is. And so that has left me feeling quite empowered in this time, actually, because I realized that intuition is, I think, perhaps the most important skill of this time that we're in and that we're navigating deeper into, because we need to know for ourselves and from ourselves, from something deeper in ourselves and from a collective intelligence, what's happening or what our next moves are, as much as possible.
I love that, because I guess that's plays to where we are, right? We're kind of in an information war in terms of, if you look to the constructed world's information, the media of such, for your for your knowledge or for your knowing, then depending on what you which channels or which platforms you use, you're going to get a very divisive view of what is reality, what is going on. It's almost impossible, even if just to know anything like what is really happening, right? So I guess this is it. Like, if you can't know yourself, then what can you know? I guess it sort of feels. So I guess this work you're doing around this whole exploration of intuition, what can you tell us? I know obviously the book is coming out. It's next year, right? It comes out.
It's coming out in December. It's actually already out for pre-order.
Amazing. We'll link to all of that. But can you share? What can you share about, just because it must have been? And I remember because you did the right at Wessex in a treehouse on your own for how long? You were
11 weeks.
Wow. Yeah. So you really were experiencing, I guess. You were really, I guess, delving deep into intuition.
Yeah, and actually the book has 9 principles and then 53 practices. It's kind of, it's a DK book, and so it's a very visual information book rather than like a book that I'm telling stories in and giving examples. You know, it's a DK book. So that was in itself a really interesting challenge of how do you take something so complex and in a way not exactly quantifiable and make it really clear. And actually I wrote those 9 principles in 10 days when I went into silence, and it was Navaratri, which is coming up again. Actually, it was the spring Navaratri, and we're just about to move into the autumn one. And
can you tell us about that?
Well, it's the celebration of the goddess Durga, who I think is the class that you came to at Alter Ego. Because she's the goddess that's like the warrior of love. That's like, to me, she's the activist archetype. If you wanted a goddess for that, and so I just turned everything off, and that was amazing, and just went so deep into myself and kind of like pulled this information out, and yeah, I guess coming out of it, there's a few things that I feel now like 3,000 times more committed to than I did before, even though they were so much part of what I understood. And that is the importance of understanding our conditioning and understanding like where we're stuck in cultural conditioning and familial conditioning and social conditioning, and that's really stopping us from being who we are or knowing who we are, and that's kind of in a way the first step in really being able to connect to your intuition. And
yes, it's just, that what you're talking about there's just making me think a bit about, as again, something that's very present, not just for me. I'm obviously seeing it out all over the place, but this question of where are we from? And, you know, I think with everything that's, you know, all the kind of, again, the sort of the reveal that's happening from, you know, everything from, you know, what's, you know, the reveal on how many indigenous populations, how many, you know, what's the real history that we're starting to understand, everything through, you know, what the Black Lives Matter movement has been revealing. Again, you know, obviously long historical knowledge to many, but to many white people, particularly myself being a white man as well, but so much is being revealed about, you know, different stories that we don't know, you know, or we haven't been told, or we haven't been in our, you know, the story that we've been told, you know, or about where we're from. And it's a question I've been exploring a lot, again, to try, you know, where am I from, for example, and not when you have no real sense of long-term ancestry or history, or I'm wondering how much that is also causing so much of the problem, you know, about, because how can you sort of even trust your intuition or even know it, even maybe, because you've never really been encouraged to sort of connect with it, you know, or explore it or trust it. I don't know. So it's just, I guess, again, I know this is all big and complicated and connected, but it's really strong at the moment for how to, you know, how do you cultivate that when you're not really sure where it's coming, you know what I mean, or where it's come from, or I don't know.
Yeah, no, I totally hear the question there, and I think it's part of it is understanding ourselves as souls, and souls have been understood in many cultures across time, and so it's not something that's so esoteric or hard to understand. But when we are able to understand ourselves that way, and then we're really able to open ourselves up to the different types of intelligence that we have, then we find that information. I mean, I didn't have any family in this country. I didn't speak the same languages as my grandmothers. and I have and none of them are alive now, my grandparents, but I have a relationship with them. I have more of a relationship with them in the last 5 years than I did when they were alive, because I didn't know how to connect to them. But I've understood how to now, and that means that I am supported, from something that is bigger than me on an ancestral level. And it also means that I've understood what that ancestral trauma is as well, that I'm carrying, which guides me not only in like what it is that I'm here to do, but it also shows me like where I've been struggling and why. And that's all information that's been really healing. And I was talking to a Lakota elder on a very recent episode of The Future is Beautiful, called Tiokasin Ghost Horse. And he was sharing about these 33 intelligences that the coronavirus is bringing to Earth, but it's not like they're new intelligences. They're like intelligences that have been forgotten, and the virus is bringing them back. And, it was so interesting because that kind of Western culture part of me wanted to be like, well, what are the 33 intelligences? Like, tell me all of them.
I need to write them down.
Yeah. And then I was like, no, that's not the way. It's like, okay, that's the clue. And then it's up to me to discover what they are, as it's up to you to discover what they are, And so, and we can help each other for sure. But we also have to, believe in our multi-dimensionality and how extraordinary we are.
Yeah, I like that there's intelligences being revealed right now. Are we able to notice them? There's another thing I guess I wanted to explore with you, which is about, so again, this is a question that I'm thinking about a lot, and it plays out, and it's something I know that many of your guests you explore with as well, which is our relationship with the more than human world. I still feel we're so far away from, as a culture, opening up to that in a meaningful way, actually sort of really kind of opening up to the fact that the world is alive. And then so I guess I'm just really curious as where you what's your sense? Do you think we can awaken to this, and do you think there's I don't know if that's making sense. It's just but I'm just, again, I'm looking at that cultural piece, like, what is it that's going to need to change for us to really kind of open up to that,
well, I feel like that's why, as well as what we do and the systemic change and the normal barometers we have for change and what's happening, there is consciousness, and there is this more than human world, and that is not included, in the calculations. And so that gives me hope. And I feel like as more and more of us open up to the more than human world, that we strengthen that bond, and we also tell the earth and nature and everything else that is more than human here that we're listening. And the more of us that are listening, it's like I can just feel that then grows in its power. And there are these like signifiers of cultural change. One example is that I never said I want to write a book on intuition. I didn't pitch that. I didn't think that was something that I wanted to do. To be honest, would have been terrified to do that anyway, because everyone thinks it's weird. And I've been like, I'm tired of holding the weird things. But a mainstream publisher approached me and said, we want to write this book. We want it to be out at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. Like, will you do it? And and then I was like, okay, great, I'm going to get over myself.
Yeah.
And any kind of fear that I have around how I might be judged, or how I might be perceived, or whether people will take it seriously or not, or, I used to make myself smaller to make other people feel more comfortable. And 2020 is like, you just can't do that anymore. Like, it's like, no, Yeah. And so I feel like that's definitely happening for many people that I know. And also, I've been talking to lots of people that have said I haven't really had, much human contact, but like you said about going to the woods and really feeling this kinship and this relationship out in nature.
Yeah.
And so
it's there, isn't it? It's there. And
yeah,
I guess it's that, exactly. Yeah. It's just that, it's fantastic. I mean, and the story of the publisher is a great example. I guess it's just belief in the intent, belief in that possibility again. I guess belief in the future is beautiful, and what will come.
Yeah. And isn't like the activism, like social change and spiritual kind of golden rule, like, don't hold too much attachment to the outcome, but you just show up, you just show up with everything you've got, and you're all in, and yet it's not, and yet you don't get like obsessed about if that's going to happen or not, but you move towards it. And I think for me, that's been really, really helpful, because I used to be a very like goal-oriented activist, and it made me ill. Like, to be honest, it just made me ill and quite depressed, because I could never reach these goals that I was trying to work towards. And so when I shifted my perspective to having a vision, and to knowing myself, and to showing up as myself for that vision, and and of course with intentionality and a desire that we do get there, but with allowing myself to enjoy the presence along the way, to enjoy the beauty along the way, so that I'm okay with whatever happens, and that I'm able to be resilient and courageous no matter what happens. And I'm able to also be there for people that are not able to do that, which I think is a big part of what these times are about as well. That it is a shaking, and if you're not somebody that's put yourself in loads of weird situations in order to shake yourself, then it's really shocking.
Yeah.
And
I know I'm quite grateful for the multiple breakdowns I've had over the last sort of 15 years. It's still been quite good ground for now.
Yeah, exactly.
You've started this leadership course.
Yes.
And tell us about that. Tell us where that's come from and how's that all panning out.
Yeah, so I do this one-to-one work with people. And again, it's really funny, because I would have thought, talking to you, I'd be really like, oh, I'm not going to talk about things like that. Which again is like this sort of thing of like getting over myself thing that like I've had to go through to be the author of Intuition. And the book is actually called Intuition in capital letters. And so, I've been working with people one-on-one for about 5-6 years now, in work that's kind of, I call it intuitive therapy. It's the type of energy healing. It's about going into subconscious patterns and clearing them and opening up to qualities and gifts that are dormant within, so that, you know, we become more of like who we really are. It's such beautiful work. And I have been hosting a leadership mentoring program called Presence Leadership Mentoring, which again, it sort of happened like a little bit randomly. I was the co-founder of a tech startup, and then I'd left the company, and then our seed funder had asked me out for lunch, and I thought, oh, and you know, I went with all my ideas of the app that I was going to pitch, and then he went, no, I really want some help, like on the spiritual side of my life. And we'd only met once because my business partner was mostly dealing with him, and I was like in my closet still, so I thought, and safely in my closet. And then he said, I think you can help me. And I was like, well, actually, I've just started secretly doing these sessions with some friends. So anyway, I started to work with him, and he then said, actually, instead of us working together when I come into London on those busy days that I'm seeing clients, and what would be great is, you know, when I'm in the countryside on Fridays and I'm in my own space, if we had our sessions then, like, do you think it's going to work on Skype those days? And so then I was like, yeah, well, we can try, because, you know, energy and the subconscious is not confined to space and time. And so why not? And so we started doing that. And then actually we'd work together quite regularly. And then what I realized, having done actually a lot of leadership work, so, you know, within my background of working in politics and working in sustainable fashion, and, you know, also like really needing to like change the world and be validated for it. And, you know, I was winning awards and stuff. It was all very important to me. I haven't won an award for years. I don't even know how didn't even know what awards there are anymore. But then I was quite focused on it. Like, somehow it was like, you know, part of what it was all about. And I had done various leadership trainings within that, including, which is really great one that was like cultural leadership for diversity in arts and culture. And so I'd been exposed to a lot of leadership work, but I often found a lot of it very like heady, like concepts, and I didn't really know how to embody them. And so what I realized was that the work that I was offering did that. And it really allowed people to drop their patterns and their conditioning, and to come more fully into their gifts, which then had such a huge effect on the work that they were doing and the way that they were showing up in the world. And so I developed this into a leadership mentoring program, which was also making that statement that this is what leadership is. You know, it's about knowing yourself and about being able to show up as fully as possible to that which you're taking a stand for, that you already care about so much, you know. And so I've been doing this one-to-one work, and that's been really amazing. And yeah, it's just such a gift to work with people in that way. I absolutely adore it. And, you know, it takes a little bit of like, you've got to be a little bit open to jump over the edge, and to and to really like trust, to learn the language of energy, and to learn intuition, and to kind of learn a different way of relating than talking provides. And this year, or something that had been on my mind for a while, was to make a course to go with it, so that also people that came to me that were newer to these kind of ways of being had like some really good resources to kind of, you know, help to take the leap, and help to like make sense of things. And so that is so that's sort of where it came from. And then actually I was feeling into it, and also feeling this need to really own the need for beauty in this world. And so I've called it the Beautiful Leadership Immersion. And yeah, that was like really, because I think we need to understand like what are the mechanisms and what is the importance of beauty being central to the way that we live and the way that we work. And so, yeah, we have these different modules over 3 months and really amazing guest faculty of people that have been on the podcast that are coming just to share little bits of wisdom and insight along the way. And it all just came together, actually, the first one within 2 weeks from kind of, oh, I'm just going to put it out there to.
Yeah, I remember seeing it out. I remember seeing you putting it out, and then the next thing I looked at it, you said, "We've now got a full crew."
Yeah, and that's not something that's normally happened for me as well. Like, I've definitely been more on the side of like, yeah, the kind of the struggle rather than that, like, you know,
something's going on, something's happening.
Yeah, but I feel like that was the thing. It is a really big call, you know, to step into oneself that way. And what was interesting as well when we had the opening circle is that a lot of people said, you know, I really struggle with the word beautiful and I really struggle with the word leadership.
And now I'm on a course.
I'm like,
brilliant.
Great,
I love that.
You know, and so actually that redefining of what it is to be a leader, which to me is to be a human at this time on Spaceship Earth, right? Like we all need to be activated in our worth and in our vision and to understand our traumas and to be courageous. And so that's what it is, this immersion. And I'll be running it again in the new year. And then, the intention will be to do it 2 or 3 times a year. Because I'm really enjoying it.
Amazing. No, I think it's just, and I think, you know, this whole opening up leadership feels so right. And, you know, because again, I think it's back to that word, right? What we started with when we started the conversation of beautiful and leadership. And like you said, it's another one. It's a word again that, you know, folks can struggle with it, or it means such a sort of locked, rigid, you know, shallow. It's got such a sort of like the depth and diversity is not there, but it needs to be, right? Of what it could be.
Yeah, totally. How do you find that word for yourself?
Leadership. I mean, again, it's funny because I guess in my, you know, over the years for me, I've been exploring a lot with various people. Again, sort of like, what does it look like to, you know, to really collaborate in ways where you're letting go of command and control approaches to things, whether it's how you create things or how you collaborate. So it's been a really live question for me: is how do you open up? How do you let go? How do you guide more or versus lead? You know. And so it's just I think it's, you know, and I think I think we're getting, you know, with everything that's happening so fast now, and, you know, the reveal is accelerating faster and faster. So I think it's become, again, but maybe it's the intuition, but people I think are, you know, really sensing and feeling, I think, more now this different form of leadership, which is more collective, which is more courageous, which is more about listening and responding and, you know, trying to sort of know in different ways, and not know. right? I think that's the other thing. So I think, it's fine. I'm doing this bit of work, been working on for a while. It's a narrative sort of story thing around, and it's just this Alice Walker quote just came up. So she says, like, look closely at the present you are constructing. It should look like the future you are dreaming. And it just really speaks to me a little bit about what we've been talking about. You know, this ability to be in the moment, but also to bring this beautiful future in, right, and to work with it in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it can't be another concept. Like, no. I think we're beyond concepts now.
Yeah, we've got too many concepts,
and we've just got to be living it and you know, embodying it and yeah, like we had one of the workshops for the immersion on redefining leadership and worth, And one of the men actually wrote and said, I was able to hear that, not just with my mind, like on an intellectual level, and then like had a real big shift actually in their understanding of worth and their understanding of their own worth. And so I feel like that's the beauty of the time that we're in right now. And that's where I'm like, yeah, okay, something's happening, and we don't know what that's going to mean.
Yeah. And there's something also, I think, and this has been exacerbated for me and or maybe just made clearer, but with the constraints we've had of like working remotely and stuff like. So this morning I did this experiment online, which is it was a good for nothing type thing, playing with this idea of Fridays being a day of participation in something bigger, something for the future, beyond our own projects. And in the good for nothing days, we'd always, bring people into a physical space, and you'd work together on stuff, and obviously it's impossible. So we're playing with this idea of like what could be done in 90 minutes on a Zoom, where you invite people in, anyone in, and then there's a couple of projects who need help, right?
Cool.
And they share their story and kind of the help they think they need, and then we can just literally just self-organize into a couple of breakout rooms and spend some time. And then the invitation is to offer whatever you want to give, and then if you want to keep going with, if you want to form a connection and keep going beyond this Zoom, then that's fine. So that was, and sort of pulled this together literally in the last week or so, and needed to be very light touch, because got too many things going on, and also not wanting to hold again, to be a block, to hold, to be responsible for holding all of these things. But we ran this session this morning, and I think about 30 people turned up, and the Eventbrite Zoom thing didn't work properly. Loads of people couldn't get in the rooms, and then we got in the rooms, and then Jessie, who's got one of the projects she was sharing, she couldn't get onto the Zoom, and it was like, oh my God, like, and the reason I'd done this date is because she'd approached me saying, I really need some help, and she's trying to start this mums for climate action movement coming out of XR, and it's a beautiful idea, and it's like, okay, well, we'll do this for you, really. And then she's phoning me going, I can't get in the room, and I've got all these people waiting to start this thing. And then, but anyway, the thing was, someone else had a project as well, and they shared it. Then Jessie came in, and it was messy, and but we got people into these rooms, and then stuff just happened. And at the end of it, everyone was like, the place was buzzing, and people have gone on, and people are mailing, and now there's little groups working on stuff. And there's something also in just, that sort of slickness that used to feel like, what I mean about, there's this leadership, this kind of, everything's sort of got to work, everything's got to be slick. And now there's something really, I think, kind of interesting in, again, letting go of that and being okay with the sort of slight, the messiness and the fact that it might be a bit dysfunctional, and actually, maybe there's all kinds of possibility in that, as well. And
yeah.
So anyway, that's just a really, but I think, and I think that's the thing of being able to sort of work more with this, with the imperfection and the, and the messiness and some of our, our maybe our more uncomfortable selves as well,
Yeah, and I mean, there's two things that I just really want to share about that. And one of them is that I had a spiritual teacher that always used to say, creativity comes out of chaos. And we would organize these like kind of retreat type things, and they would always be so chaotic, and it was almost like, why can't we just get ourselves together and like make it smooth? And he was like, you're missing the point. Like, it will never be smooth, because all of that needs to happen in order for us to get where we get to. And I'm like, okay, I get that. And then the other thing is understanding perfection as a tool of the systems of oppression, of white supremacy, of patriarchy, and that by having this idea of perfection, which is always connected to an idea outside of ourselves. So it goes back to what we were saying before about needing to do the unlearning of the conditioning, and then actually be able to connect to, ourselves, because that notion of what's going to be perfect is comes from a different construct. And so, then we're able to let things be what they are, and then we're able to enjoy them and find the power in what they are, rather than, just, this is also another issue that I always had with having a job, was that I couldn't cope with like all these rules that didn't make any sense. It just seemed to like waste a lot of time and take the energy down of like what we were doing. And now I understand, like, oh, that's because I wasn't really resonating with that expression of a system of white supremacy. And I wanted things to be freer so that we could listen more, so that we could be more creative, so that we could really then, have more impact, but in a very real way. Like, and it doesn't mean that the impact would be like bigger, but it would be more true.
Yeah. There's a sort of there's a quality to the impact, rather than this sort of quantification of impact and scale and numbers and things. There's more of a sort of a deeper sense of impact, maybe.
Yeah.
Amazing, Amisha. We could go on, but we have gone on. First of all, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been brilliant, and as I said out front, I just what you do and what you've been doing is it's amazing work, and it's a real gift what you put out into the world. So thank you for all of that. And I shall continue to sort of listen through the woods as I'm running and stopping like a startled deer and going, what happened there? But yeah, thank you for joining me on this. Is there? The best thing for people is to tune into your podcast, right? And there are other things that you've got going on as well. What else could we be? Is there anything? You've got the book coming up. There's quite a bit going on, to be honest.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a real joy to spend this time with you, and I would absolutely love for you to come on The Future is Beautiful next year. And I've got loads of questions that I want to ask you. So in that space, I'm really good at listening.
Excellent. Oh, that'd be lovely.
This space, I've been talking a lot. So
yeah, but that was the point.
but yeah, I look forward to being able to ask you some questions. And
marvelous. We'll do that.
And yeah. So the podcast, The Future is Beautiful, and then with that, Presence Collective, and then the Beautiful Leadership Immersion coming up in January, and the book coming out in December. And you can find everything on amisha.co.uk and thefutureisbeautiful.co.
Amazing. We'll link out to all of that. So yeah, so I guess, this might be a little closing shot. The Spaceship Earth. What does it mean right now for you to sort of becoming crew on the Spaceship Earth right now? What does that say to you?
Yeah, I just get this image, which is really embodying vision. It's like when I imagine being part of the crew of Spaceship Earth, I feel that sense of mission. And then I feel like a stronger invitation into knowing, like, myself, the part that I have to contribute, that is unique to my soul, and that that kind of power of believing in what's possible and being part of a team.
Amazing. Thank you, Amisha. We shall speak next year, if not before.
Yeah, I hope so. And, who knows, maybe even a walk in the woods along the way.
That'd be nice. A real walk in a real wood.
Yeah, that would be nice.
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Amisha. Do check out her work. Do check into her podcast if you haven't already. It's mega And you can follow up on the courses that she's offering to the world, her new book, a bunch of stuff. Definitely check in on that. So thanks for tuning in. It's 2021. Who knows, but each day at a time. That's where I am at these days. If you like what you're hearing, please do give us a like or give us a rating in Apple Podcasts. It will take a few seconds and it'll be mightily appreciated, and it helps other people find the podcast. Or share it on if you like an episode, or just give us some feedback. You can drop us a line, dan@thespaceship.earth, or you can find us on Instagram @thespaceship.earth. Take good care out of there. And until next time, peace and out.